Nationwide, the number of new cases per day is flattening, substantially suggesting that we are near the peak and our comprehensive strategy is working. Over time, our guidelines to slow the spread are decreasing the rate of new cases very substantially and will result in fewer hospital admissions, and we're seeing that. It's incredible. I think with no exceptions, it's looking like it's lower. And again, that's because of the people doing what they had to do, great people, and working with elected representatives and the doctors, the nurses, and everybody. I mean, just everybody. So everybody has been so amazing. I was told this morning again, please mention all of those people working in the grocery stores, and it's true. The checkouts and the clerks and the people that are really, and a number of those people have become infected. So we want to thank them and a shout out to them. With the tireless devotion of American doctors and nurses and all of the medical people, we've kept our fatality rate very, very low compared to other countries. My administration's closely monitoring the data on the virus's impact on our cherished African-American communities because they've been hit hard. And the Surgeon General will be sharing more of that information right after we're finished here. He'll be coming up and saying exactly what's happening because it's really, it's very troublesome, I will tell you that. I'd also like to provide clarity on the important point for many Americans on elective surgeries. While we've asked hospitals to cancel surgeries and procedures that do not take place at this time, just not to do them now, the choice to delay any treatment still remains between the patient and their doctor. We're not advising Americans to postpone medical treatment that their doctor believes should occur now. So it's different kinds of surgery, obviously. But we're really getting to the point where you can start to think about doing that surgery, if necessary, pretty soon, I think, pretty soon. Yesterday, I directed Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue to expedite aid to American farmers. And Secretary Perdue will be using all of the tools at his disposal to develop a program, and very quickly, of at least $16 billion to provide relief for farmers, ranchers, and producers impacted by the coronavirus. In this time of crisis, we must keep our supply chains moving from the beginning, right from beginning to end, and we're committed to supporting the amazing men and women who produce supply. I did last night a statement on social media, and I said, I have directed Secretary Sonny Perdue to expedite help to our farmers, especially to the smaller farmers who are very, very badly hurting right now. I expect Secretary Perdue to use all of the funds and authorities at his disposal to make sure that our food supply is stable and safe, and our great farmers are prosperous and continue to be prosperous. We're working very hard to make sure our food supply chain is sound and plentiful, but we all know that that begins with our farmers, cattlemen, ranchers, and producers. So we're going to be working with the small farmers, the big farmers, the cattlemen, the ranchers, all of the producers. We're going to take care of them. We're working with them right now. We have a lot of money that was put there through our use of tariffs and other means, and we're going to help out our farmers. And I don't think, I tell you, I've been helping our farmers for a couple of years because they were targeted, as you know, by China and others. And I think they're very grateful for what we've done. On the medical front, the FDA has issued 47 emergency use authorizations for advancements in testing, new ventilator designs, innovations in personal protective equipment, and experimental medicines, and Dr. Hahn's going to be talking about that. We've cut through the red tape to give doctors and patients unprecedented freedom to make their own health care decisions, granting access to potential therapies and drugs. Since Monday, we've deployed 2 major shipments of hydroxychloroquine from our national stockpile. It's going to various cities. And we are also disposing and getting, as quickly as we can, portions of it to the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Defense. And speaking of the Department of Defense, they're going to be sending us 10 million N95 masks that they had. And we're in great shape in every way. We're in great shape with ventilators. We're in great shape with protective clothing. We have additional plane loads coming in, but we're not getting any calls from governors at this moment. I can speak, I think, for Vice President Pence, who'll be talking in a little while. We're getting very few calls from governors or anybody else needing anything. They're in great shape for this surge that's coming in certain areas in particular, and that's a good job. You've done a great job on that, Mike, really a great job. I appreciate it. The whole country appreciates it. More than 2 million coronavirus tests have now been completed, and we're conducting approximately 100,000 more every day. We're also working to bring blood-based serology tests to the market as quickly as possible so that Americans can determine whether or not they have already had the virus and potentially have immunity. They have immunity if they've had the virus. A lot of them don't even know if they've had it. Sometimes it's brutal. You see the Prime Minister, who seems to be doing well now, I hope. He had a rough go of it and still is, but he's doing better. And then some people don't even know they had it. It could be sniffles. It could be they don't feel perfect, but they've had it. They're the lucky ones. The NIH, CDC, and FDA are currently validating these antibody tests to ensure that they're accurate, and they're doing that at breakneck speed. I think we can say that, Doctor, and we're going to get them approved very quickly. Dr. Hahn. When validated, we're confident that the production will scale up to tens of millions of tests very quickly. We're leading the world now in testing by far, and we're going to keep it that way. Other countries are coming to us, and they're wanting to know about our tests, and can they buy the tests, and can they do whatever they have to do to get the tests, and we're going to make that very soon. We'll be in a position to make that possible because it's important for them to have it. And we're going to have an announcement on the World Health Organization sometime next week. As you know, we give them approximately $500 million a year, and we're going to be talking about that subject next week. We'll have a lot to say about it. We'll hold it. Every American should be proud of what our country has achieved in just a short period of time. The U.S. military has deployed thousands of personnel to build 23 temporary hospitals with more than 16,000 beds. And we have the potential to build many more if we needed them. We're all ready to go, but I don't think we're going to need them, which is great news. And we built those hospitals in 12 states and the District of Columbia using the Defense Production Act, and we used it like a hammer. A lot of the media said, oh, we weren't using it. We used it like a hammer, to a point where all we had to do is say the words and everybody gave us max, and they've done a good job. They really have done a good job, with few exceptions. And we've harnessed the full power of American industry to produce ventilators and other essential supplies. Right now, we're making thousands of ventilators, many of which we won't need, but we'll use them in our stockpile, and we'll build that up. We'll also help build up the stockpiles, which they should have had, in the states, and so we're working with governors on that, and we'll also help other countries. There are countries that are calling us for help. They need ventilators, and they're in no position to build ventilators. We are. We have Ford and General Motors, and many companies are building ventilators. So we're going to be helping at a not too distant point. We're going to be helping quite a few of the countries. Now, we've launched Project Airbridge to deliver nearly 300 million pieces of personal protective equipment from and around the globe. We're also shipping out 60 sterilization systems to 10 different cities that can each sterilize up to 80,000 masks each day, and I'm even hearing it can go up to 120,000 masks a day, certain equipment with certain additions. It's a company in Ohio that makes it. It's a great company, great. I hear it's a great product, works very well. I asked that question. I said, how come we have to buy so many masks? Why can't we sterilize the masks that are being used? And the answer was you can. In this case, they say up to 20 times. So we can take a mask, certain types of masks, the N95s, in particular. We can sterilize them, make them very clean up to 20 times. That's a great thing. In addition, we passed the largest emergency economic relief package in American history to save the U.S. economy and protect the American worker. As you know, this past week, which was 4 active days on the stock market, Good Friday today is not included. The markets are closed. In 4 days, we had the biggest stock market increase that we've had in 50 years. That tells you that there's a pent-up demand. That tells you they want to get back. There's something good going to happen. I really believe that. There's something very good going to happen. We have to get back. So think of it in this horrible period, this horrible, dark period where this monster came and worked its horrible, horrible spell over the world. 184 countries as of this morning. 184 countries. We've done well, and I guess the market thinks we've done well because we had the biggest stock market increase without one day. We're talking 4 days instead of 5 that we've had in 50 years. 50 years. Think of that. More than 50 years, actually. In short, the American people have launched the greatest mobilization of our society since World War II, deploying every scientific, governmental, medical, and military resource to defeat the virus. So I want to just start then with, we're going to answer questions later. We'll have time. I think we have a lot of time today. A lot of people are off, as they should be, Good Friday. So I'll stick around. We'll answer questions later. I want to start with Deborah Birx, please, Dr. Birx, and you can go over some of the numbers we just looked at, and that'd be great. Thank you very much, Deborah.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for outlining how well we are doing in a series of metro areas. What also has been encouraging for those of you who are watching epidemic curves every day, and I'm sure you are, and watching them in log phase, because that's how epidemiologists like to look at their curves, you can see for the first time that in the United States we're starting to level on the logarithmic phase like Italy did about a week ago. And so this gives us great heart that not only in specific places, but we're starting to see that change. Obviously, a lot of that is driven by the improvement in New York City. Remember, for a long time, they were over 50% of our cases and 50% of our new cases. That has dramatically changed because of the impact of what the citizens of New York and New Jersey and across Connecticut and now Rhode Island are doing to really change the course of this pandemic and really change the trajectory of new cases. We're seeing that what many states and metro areas were experienced as twofold and fourfold increases that went to twofold, that now those are going to 8 days between the doubling rate. Watching this every day gives us hope across these metro areas, from New York and New Jersey and all through Denver and, of course, through New Orleans. We still see cases occurring in the Boston area and in Chicago, but their rate of increase seems to be stabilizing. And we really want to call out the work of the mayors of Baltimore and the district and Philadelphia, who have really brought all of their health experts together and working with their communities are starting to really change the curves in those areas. What we're seeing is we're united in social distancing. And that's been very encouraging to all of us. And it should be encouraging to the healthcare providers that are on the front line, many of which are serving our Americans with such dignity and respect and ensuring that everybody gets optimal care. And as the President noted, our mortality in the United States is significantly less than many of the other countries when you correct them for our population. And that is really solely the work of our frontline healthcare providers. And so working with, you can really, hopefully you get the theme today that we are incredibly proud of our public health leaders at the city level, at the state level, at the federal level, who are working together to really change the course of this pandemic, working with their citizens and their communities to make these changes. And the American public, who have really taken all of this to heart and stayed home. I know last week we really asked a lot of people in the Washington and Baltimore area to consolidate not go out frequently to grocery stores or pharmacies, you can really see that that's having a huge impact. So it's really about the encouraging signs that we see, but as encouraging as they are, we have not reached the peak. And so every day we need to continue to do what we did yesterday and the week before and the week before that, because that's what in the end is going to take us up across the peak and down the other side. We continue to really applaud the work of California and Washington State and Oregon. We're learning from all three of those states, from their public health officials, about how they were able to keep the virus from ever becoming logarithmic. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us on how they did that, what the timing was in case we ever have to face this issue in the future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Tony? Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So again, just keeping on the theme that Dr. Birx had mentioned, this is the end of the week, that famous week that we spoke about last weekend, in which what actually was predicted to happen happened. We're starting to see the leveling off and the coming down that Dr. Birx had mentioned. But it's important to remember that this is not the time to feel that since we have made such important advance in the sense of success of the mitigation, that we need to be pulling back at all. I was actually heartened by the fact that we've been talking about the New York, New Jersey, New Orleans, and other areas where they have really big spikes. But there's other parts of the country, in the middle parts of the country, where they're concerned to make sure they don't get those spikes. And I really want to salute the governors of states throughout the entire United States, but particularly in the central part of the country, because the governors obviously see us in these press conferences. And I've had calls over the last several days from several of the governors, from Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, Utah. Just about an hour and a half ago, I spoke with the governors of Arkansas and Wyoming, who are really committed to make sure that they don't get into the situation where they're going to have spikes in their state. And they're doing the kinds of things that they don't get recognized because people don't talk about them much. But we have a big country. We have 50 states, and it's not only the big cities. So if we're going to pull out of this, we're going to pull out of it in the big cities, and we're going to pull out of it in those areas that aren't as densely populated. And I just want to give a shout out to them. They're doing an extraordinary job. I was really pleasant. I wouldn't say surprised, because I expect it of this country. But to hear what they're doing and the commitment that they're putting into making sure that we don't have the kinds of situations that we've experienced, unfortunately, in other areas, this is very important. I just want to close by one other thing, something I mentioned yesterday and the day before, that there are a lot of candidate interventions that are going into clinical trials. For those of you who are interested in it, I recommend you go to clinicaltrials.gov, and you'll see the design of a clinical trial, and you see that many of them are the randomized controlled trials that are the really gold standard of how you find out whether something really is safe and effective. And as the weeks and months, and it'll probably be months, sometime in the summer, we'll start to see which are working, which are not, and to focus on those that are we developing and will working. I'll be happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. The White House Task Force has been very focused on increasing the supply of personal protective equipment for our great providers. I was one of those providers a few months ago, and I can tell you nothing is more important than making sure they have what they need. So in order to increase the supply of N95 masks, FDA has worked with industry and has now authorized 2 companies who will supply machines to sterilize N95 masks. Admiral Polovchek and FEMA are purchasing on behalf of U.S. government 60 sterilization machines, as mentioned by the President. And they will be positioned around the country to increase the amount of supply of N95 masks. Each machine will be able to sterilize 80,000 N95 masks per day, and we hope to actually increase that further. The Vice President and the White House Task Force challenged us yesterday, and we responded as a team. FDA issued revised guidance regarding the laundering of gowns, because gowns are another issue in terms of supply that we're looking forward on. This is not something that normally happens around the country, but issued this guidance. It's on our website now at FDA. So there's information about how hospitals can do that to increase the supply. We've heard concerns.
You're watching the daily White House briefing on the coronavirus. just heard Anthony Fauci talking about the importance of keeping up with the lockdowns, not the time that we pull back on this at all, he said. Before that, of course, Donald Trump was at the podium saying that clear signs that the aggressive strategy is working, which is saving countless lives, he said. We had a number of 100,000 lives lost, he said, but I think we will be substantially under that number. Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Kimberley Halkett, who's been listening in. Kimberley, what did you make of what you heard?
Yeah, before we go to the main topic about coronavirus, which is, of course, what this is an update on the task force briefing. The U.S. president started out that briefing with a bit of an update on another story we've been following here on Al Jazeera, and that, of course, is the issue of the oversupply of oil in the sort of the larger global oil production system. And he announced there that he seems to believe that he has worked out an end to the standoff that has existed between Mexico and OPEC to cut their crude by 100,000 barrels a day. And he talked about why this was important to the United States, because he was concerned about the loss of jobs in that industry. So a little bit of an update from the U.S. president there. And it is important to note, because we did know earlier that he had also had a phone call with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, where they talked about stability in the global market. So it's clear that in addition to coronavirus, this is one of the other issues that the U.S. president has been working on in the last few hours. Now, turning to coronavirus, the U.S. president is still very eager to tout what he sees as some of the successes that have taken place in the United States in the face of what continue to be persistent criticisms about his response in the United States to the spread of coronavirus, that he is highlighting. Well, he doesn't see it as a positive headline by any means when you're talking about the number of deaths in the United States, but the number now downgraded from that initial 200,000 to even 2 million that was first projected, now looking in the range of 60,000. He also talked about some of the positive signs that are being seen as a result of data with regard to some of those hot spots. New Orleans, the city of New Orleans in the American South, as well as Detroit, Michigan in the north of the country near the Canadian border, and also talking about that there seems to be this flattening of the curve. And you heard that from some of the public health officials as well, that these are very encouraging signs. The U.S. president talking about this. How do we know that this is occurring in terms of that curve we talk about in charts, and the peak, the flattening of it being the reduction in fewer hospital admissions, showing that those guidelines that were put in place till April 30th, encouraging people to stay home, seems to be working. And that is something that's being echoed by those public health officials there. But at the same time, they're cautioning, as we go into a holiday weekend here in the United States, don't change your behaviors, because while it's working, if those behaviors change 2 weeks from now, there could be a new spike. And this is what they're really worried about. So the guidance, again, stay home, don't go out unless absolutely necessary, because lives depend on it.
Right. President Trump also talking about WHO, actually referring to an announcement that will be made next week, reference the $500 million a year that the U.S. government gives to the WHO.
Yeah, and I wanted to double check a little bit something the producer can tell me in my ear as we're talking here. I believe I'm going to throw to an earlier soundbite where we were listening to the World Health Organization chief talking there. And let me set this up a little bit for you. The U.S. president there was talking about an announcement that is imminent coming from his side next week. And of course, we've had this tit for tat back and forth between the World Health Organization and Donald Trump. And he has throughout this week reiterated that he believes that the World Health Organization has not delivered in terms of outcomes, that it was too slow to declare a global health emergency. So he has been saying and threatening that he is going to cut funding. Now, we're not entirely clear if that's what the announcement will be. We do know that the United States is one of the largest donors, but while not naming the president, U.S. president directly, the chief of the World Health Organization has on 2 occasions this week been briefing where he's spoken directly to Donald Trump's challenges, saying it is incumbent on G20 nations, of which, of course, the United States is one, to make sure that the other nations around the world, about 30%, are short on personal protective equipment, something he finds alarming, and that he feels that all of these sort of wealthier nations like the United States have a responsibility to address. Take a listen to what Dr. Tedros had to say earlier.
We are particularly concerned by the large number of infections reported among health workers. In some countries, there are reports of up to 10% of health workers being infected. This is an alarming trend. When health workers are at risk, we're all at risk.
Now, in terms of fact-checking, one fact that did strike me the U.S. president talking about there is that he said that the United States, in terms of contributions to the World Health Organization, that in fact he said something about $500 million a year, that was the U.S. contribution. Now, we did some fact-checking here at Al Jazeera in the last couple of days, and that is not entirely true from the numbers that we can see. In fact, Congress for this fiscal year, the U.S. Congress pledged $122 million to the World Health Organization. Donald Trump has proposed $58 million for the next fiscal year. It's unlikely Congress would allow the cut to be that significant. So we'll have to watch very carefully for this imminent announcement next week on the World Health Organization. The U.S., again, Donald Trump saying that he doesn't believe it has delivered on outcomes and it was slow to declare a global emergency with regard to coronavirus, and now threatening to cut aid, something that the World Health Organization says it would certainly have a tremendously detrimental impact given the global health challenge it now faces.
And the president also talking about deploying 2 major shipments of the drug, the malaria drug, hydroxychloroquine. And that's a drug over which there has been some controversy, hasn't there?
Yeah, there's been a lot of controversy regarding this. Mainly, the biggest controversy has come from the fact that Donald Trump has no medical background whatsoever, but continues to tout its benefits. Now, he's always said it with a caveat that, check with your doctor first, but then says, what have you got to lose? If you're already facing a life-threatening health emergency, you've got, in his view, and it is his personal view, nothing to lose and everything to gain. And there is a case of a state lawmaker in the U.S. state of Michigan, I believe, who says she followed that advice and she believes it cured her. And Donald Trump has talked extensively about that. But again, you heard there Dr. Anthony Fauci saying that while there are some interventions that are now in clinical trials, it could be months before it's known which one of these are effective. And I know a little bit from talking to one of my FDA, Food and Drug Administration contacts, that when it comes to clinical trials, what they need to do is check and see whether or not there are reproductive side effects, and that's what takes time. So to be touting a therapy which we do not know, have detrimental effects in terms of human reproduction, this is something certainly that the president is gambling with, but he's using his pulpit, and we know that these briefings are widely watched to tout this, and this is one of the concerns, that the U.S. president is putting forward medical advice without the proper background in order to do so.
It's Good Friday. Let's be nice. Okay, let's be real nice. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. President. Can you clarify a little bit what the U.S. offered to Mexico in order to agree to that oil deal? And then also go into detail about what you spoke about on oil with President Putin this morning.
So all of the OPEC nations met, and others, and they're all agreeing to cut back because there's a tremendous glut. We're filling up our strategic reserves. We don't even have room to store it. In fact, they're using ships to store oil. There's never been anything like this. It was being overproduced to start off with, and then you had the virus, and that took off 40% right there. So we have there's a lot of oil like nobody's ever seen before. It's good in many ways, and depending on where you are, who you are, it's bad. We have a tremendous energy business with hundreds of thousands of jobs. We're doing great, #1 in the world. So they all got together and they said, we're going to cut it because we have to get rid of this tremendous supply. Now, the good news is gasoline prices, I'm seeing 90 cents, 85 cents in different parts of the country a gallon. Nobody's ever seen that. I guess you have to go back to the 1950s where they had the big, large dollar bills. Remember? You don't remember. You're too young. But the fact that you have to go back a long ways to see it. So there's some good. The airlines are trying to come back. Having low fuel costs is good for them. And other reasons, steel manufacturing, but a lot of the steel goes to building what we do for the oil and engineering firms. So, you know, that's a double-edged sword. But we want to keep our energy. We want to remain independent. We will remain independent, I think, regardless. But we want to get rid of this tremendous overflow. There's no place to even store it. So the OPEC nations met. They've been meeting. And, you know, I've hated OPEC over the years, absolutely hated them. But obviously it broke down. And we potentially have years' worth of supply, a long time before it ever can catch up, even if they do reduce it. And they agreed, but Mexico didn't agree. It was one of the few countries that didn't agree. This is OPEC plus. These are OPEC plus countries outside, you understand? Yes. And Mexico didn't agree. And I understand the president very well. He has a level when he came in, and he wanted to keep it at that level. Oil is important for Mexico. The problem is, and I explained it very strongly, you know, you're going to be selling it for $5 or $10 a barrel, so in the end it's bad. But he did have some political difficulty with it, frankly, and I understand that too. And it's a small amount for us. It's a large amount for Mexico, but it's a very small amount for the United States, being the biggest producer. So I agreed to pick up some of the slack. So he was going to reduce it by 100,000 barrels, reduce his output by 100,000 barrels. And I was going to pick up the slack, and they would make it up to us at a later date. They would make up what we're doing at a later date. It could be in a different form. And I don't know whether or not that's going to be, for Mexico it was acceptable. I don't know whether or not that's going to be acceptable to the other oil-producing nations. We'll find out. But it's something that would certainly be acceptable to me to get it over the back. So Mexico is going to reduce by 100,000 barrels. And that would mean that they're 250 to 300 barrels short. We'd make up the difference. They would reimburse us at a later date. Okay?
You mean make
Pretty
up the
simple.
difference by cutting U.S. production?
By cutting some U.S. production. Now, the U.S. production's already been cut because we're a market-driven economy, and oil is very market-driven. They've been cutting oil all over the place. We're cutting it back. And what does it mean, really? It means we have it in the ground, we can use it. Now, we have a lot of ground with a lot of oil in it. I think we're number one in that, too. We're probably number one, especially with ANWR. As you know, I got ANWR approved in Alaska. That's one of the biggest finds anywhere in the world. So when you add it all up, I think we're probably number one, even in what we have under. We're very lucky. We grew up in a land that was rich in a lot of ways, but it's also rich because it has a lot of oil underneath, oil and gas. And as you know, natural gas, LNG, is all over the country now at a very low price. And our carbon, our atmosphere, the level of environmental cleanliness is at its all-time best right now, all-time best, because we are using a lot of natural gas. But we have many forms of energy, including some of the newer forms that people want to see us go to. We have a lot of different forms of energy. We're number one in the world. We want to keep it that way. So we're helping Mexico out. We will be reimbursed in a form sometime in the future.
Mr. President, I want to ask you about the new federal projections in a moment, but first, today you tweeted the invisible enemy will soon be in full retreat. Given it's invisible, without widespread testing, how would you know?
Well, I think that we're going to have it in retreat. Will it be today? No. Tomorrow? No. But it will be at a certain point in the not too distant future. It will be gone.
And how do you do that without the widespread testing? Specifically, my question.
Oh, we'll know because people aren't going to go to the hospital. People aren't going to get sick. You're going to know that without. But we're going to do very substantial testing. We're doing more testing right now than any other country in the world by far. And if you'd like to have that question answered, I'll have the professional answer it. Deborah, perhaps you could come up. We are doing tremendous testing, but you'll know. You're going to know before anybody because you're going to see nobody's getting sick anymore. It will be gone, and it won't be that much longer. Go ahead.
I'll ask you about the projections after. Thanks, Mr. President.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the testing, I want to reemphasize about what kind of testing we're talking about. This is RNA diagnostic testing. That is the platform that was built to respond to this epidemic. It is the same platform that we utilize for HIV viral loads. And so many HIV clients have also given up their space on the machines to have these tests run for all of Americans. This assay is complicated. It's not like an assay that you have for your other diseases, your strep test or other diseases like that. This is a very complicated assay that requires a lot of technical oversight, and it's part of the reason why not all 100% our machines are running at full capacity, but we had great discussion with the lab directors about that. every day more are brought online. And so, but I think we have to create expectations of what the daily test rates will be. Last year, we probably did 3 million HIV viral loads or 4 million HIV viral loads as a country. We've done over almost 2.2 million in 4 weeks. So this is unprecedented in what we have to do. I think that's why we're working very hard for 2 pieces, and I want to make sure that people understand testing is just part of our strategy. The other part of the strategy has to be this syndromic and influenza-like illness where there's an alert to an illness, and so that we're surveying where we know the most vulnerable cases have appeared. And the great call that I had with the mayors and with the health officials yesterday and mayors today, a lot of the rural areas, their primary, and as it was in Washington and California, was at the nursing homes. So the issue is to build a testing strategy that speaks to our strengths, of laser-focusing a strategic approach to testing when we know what our volumes are, and they increase every day, but we have to be realistic about what the volumes will be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, and combine that with strategic surveillance so that we're testing symptomatic people and their contacts very quickly to go back to contact tracing, utilizing our complete strategy. And I think we're very much interested, and it's why the president 3 weeks ago really put us on getting an antibody test. And I think I called from the podium for our university colleagues and hospitals to begin an ELISA-based test because that's a blood draw. But we really wanted a finger prick to make it easy and deployable. That's what's being worked on now. Of course, we don't want to promise until we have it, because I think we deserve that. The American people deserve that, to have a test that is efficient to let people know who's been positive for immunity. That's critical to epidemiologists and public health officials to know what the penetrance of a virus was into a community when all you're seeing are the serious cases and testing the most symptomatic. And so that's a question that we still have. Is this the tip of the iceberg, or is this half the iceberg or 3/4 of the iceberg, what we have seen to date? And we have, I just want to complete the thought by saying, in the areas where we had an outbreak, these large metros, Louisiana, Denver, Detroit, Chicago, New York, New Jersey, but per capita, we've done more tests than any other place in the world. That was intentional. We focused the test where the need was the greatest and the burden of disease the greatest. And now we're trying to really see how strategically that very valuable resource can be utilized around the countries to create a mosaic of testing combined with surveillance.
Can I ask you about the new federal projections? There's new reporting today that new federal projections suggest lifting.
I'd like to ask you.
I'd like to ask you, if I can, about the new federal projections that suggest lifting the 30-day shelter-in-place orders would lead to a spike in infections. Have you seen those new projections from your Department of Homeland Security and HHS?
I have not. When did they say this would take place? When?
They said that it would take place if the 30-day shelter-in-place were to be removed. There are 3 different examples.
We'll talk about that. Doctor, would you like to talk
Does
about
that
that?
impact your thinking, though? That
We
those...
haven't seen it.
No, I haven't seen it.
They haven't seen it. I guess you're saying I guess they leaked it to NBC. Huh?
They didn't leak it to us. It's being reported by
Nobody's
others.
seen it, and they're the ones that do it.
It's your administration, so I asked. It's from the HHS and DOJ. Yeah, I'll circle back.
We'll find out about it. They don't know about it.
So in
You want to
terms,
say something, Tony?
First of all, Peter, I haven't seen that, so I can't quote on that. But yeah,
reported within the
that's
last
okay. I still haven't seen it. I've been in here all day.
I'm just saying what to me. I'm just telling you what I know.
So what I think that they're talking about is that whenever you pull back, you would expect that you might start seeing cases. And what we've been talking about, what Dr. Birx has just mentioned, is that when you see that, that's where you want your resources to be able to very efficiently, in real time, identify, isolate, and contact trace. So don't let anyone get any false ideas that when we decide at a proper time when we're going to be relaxing some of the restrictions, there's no doubt you're going to see cases. I would be so surprised if we did not see cases. The question is how you respond to them. I think that's what they were referring to.
I guess the question, Mr. President, should Americans have to decide between staying healthy and going back to work?
Look, I think we're going to do both. We're going to go back to work, and we're going to stay healthy. And staying healthy is also a proportion. If you look at what we're doing, we're looking at a date. We hope we're going to be able to fulfill a certain date. but we're not doing anything until we know that this country is going to be healthy. We don't want to go back and start doing it over again, even though it would be in a smaller scale. Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. So just a follow-up on the oil question. The president of Mexico said that you had agreed that the U.S. would cut production by 250,000 barrels per day. Is that what you agreed to?
Yes, we would, which we've already done, by the way. But we would agree to a reduction cut. They would agree to do something to compensate us in the future. Okay?
Do you make any assurances to Saudi Arabia that you, the United States, would not bail out oil drillers here?
We didn't discuss that with Saudi Arabia. We just discussed the numbers, and we discussed who's opposed and who's not. And pretty much everybody is in favor of it because they're getting clobbered. They're all getting clobbered. All of those countries are having problems. If you look at Saudi Arabia, that's their source of income, primary source of income by far. So they want to do it. Russia wants to do it. The OPEC nations want to do it. They all want to do it. So we'll see what happens. There's a difference between wanting to do it and doing it. Yeah, go ahead. OAN in the back.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a national security question back to Venezuela and China.
Venezuela, go ahead.
Your administration has placed a $15 million bounty on Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. And we have news this morning that President Xi is talking with Nicolas Maduro, expressing his financial support for Maduro. So 2 questions. 1, have you discussed with Dr. Xi, or President Xi, the U.S. policy on Maduro? And 2, how does this affect U.S. policy with regards to its war on anti-narcotics?
We will not be happy if that takes place. I have not spoken to President Xi of China about Venezuela, about that aspect of Venezuela. But if that took place, we will not be happy. Okay? I will not be happy.
Are you concerned that he's opening up another financial avenue?
I'm concerned about everything. That's why I don't sleep a lot. I get myself concerned about everything. But I would not be happy about that. Go ahead.
Mr. President, getting back to Peter's question, a variation of that question, your doctors who are gathered here seem to be in doubt as to whether or not the country can reopen on May the 1st. If they come to you before May the 1st and say the country is not ready or huge parts of the country are not ready to reopen on May the 1st, will you listen to them?
I listen to them about everything. I think they're actually surprised. I have great respect for these people, all of them. You look, and others that are working with us. I have great respect for this group. In fact, I told Tony Fauci, I said, why don't you move to New York, run against AOC, you will win easily. But he decided that he's not going to do that. Okay. I kid, by the way. You know that.
Some of your allies have been bashing these doctors. Would you tell them to cut it out?
I can only say this. I have tremendous respect for these people, and we've done very well. And when you look at us compared to others, we're a big nation. When you look at us compared to others, when you see how we've taken testing from a broken system that I inherited to having the best tests that anyone's made anywhere in the world, and other countries are calling us, wanting to use our technology, I have great respect for these people. I'm never saying bad about these people.
If they come back to you, sir, and say, before May the 1st, we can't open on May the 1st, do you listen?
I will certainly listen. I will certainly listen.
You take that
There are two
advice.
sides. Remember, I understand the other side of the argument very well, because I look at both sides of an argument. I will listen to them very carefully, though. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. You may have seen this, but J.P. Morgan came out with a forecast about GDP growth in the second quarter. They're saying a 40% decline in the second quarter of this year. Do your economic advisors share that view?
I think my economic advisors are interested in the third quarter and really the fourth quarter. And I think we have a chance to do record fourth quarter numbers because there's a tremendous pent-up demand. And you see it this week. I mean, what reason would there be other than faith in us and in this country, faith in this group and me and our vice president and everybody, governors perhaps, you can add them into it also. What reason would that be for, in a shortened week, 4 days instead of 5, to have the biggest stock market gain in over 50 years? So I think that, to me, there's a sign. Hey, look, with all we've been down, I mean, we've never been hit. I don't know, has this country ever been hit like this? Probably not. 1917, but that was different, and it was a different time. And frankly, Europe took the brunt of it. We didn't, but it was a terrible time also. But probably never been hit like this, right? Somebody was saying, in fact, I was speaking with Governor Cuomo about it because we were in New York City, a place we love, New York State, with the World Trade Center. And that was approximately 3,000 people. Well, we've doubled that in this same area. We've doubled that, more than double it, substantially more. And it's obviously going. You know, we had our highest number yesterday and the day before. Okay, with all of this news, what would lead you to believe that we're going to have the best stock market week, shortened week, in 50 years? Almost broke the all-time record. You know what that is? That's a pent-up demand. Now, that's my opinion. The other thing is we're doing tremendous stimulus plans. And despite what you're reading, you know, there's back and forth, but we are getting along with the Democrats. They want to see something happen. We have to help our workers. We have to help our small businesses. We have to help our restaurants. I think deductibility will be great for entertainment, restaurants, all of that. Look, I think with the stimulus, with the people, with what we've got going, with all of the things, we're going to be meeting with the airlines over the weekend. We have a great plan for the airlines. We've got to keep the airlines going. You know, it's never been a great business, but it's a very vital business for the country. We're going to be meeting with Boeing. We're going to be meeting with a lot of companies that are great companies and were great companies a short while ago. I mean, we can't let anything happen to Boeing. It's, you know, got so much potential. You talk about potential. Can anything have more potential than that? So we have a lot of very exciting things taking place. We have tremendous plans. We have tremendous stimulus. And I think we have a chance to do really well. So this quarter isn't the quarter I'm looking at. Third quarter, we start to think about it. And I think fourth quarter is going to be at a level that maybe we haven't seen before. I think our country, with the stimulus, with all that we've been through, we've learned a lot. Don't forget, we've learned about pandemics and epidemics. We've learned a tremendous amount. And with all that we've learned, as an example, we're making ventilators. We have thousands of them being delivered in the very near future. We have countries calling us, can we have ventilators? That would have been an unthinkable call. I wouldn't know what to say. They have people dying, but we needed them for ourselves. We have plenty before the surge. In New York, they need far fewer hospital rooms or far fewer hospital beds in particular than we thought. And I have to say, Dr. Birx told me that 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. Remember, you said, that number's too high. We don't need that many. And based on what she said and others, we did what we had to do. We actually gave the maximum. We built Javits. We sent the ship in. We then made the ship COVID because, you know, there weren't a lot of people on the roads. You didn't have the accidents that we thought, other unrelated accidents. Nobody driving. You know, normally you have a lot of car accidents. You have a lot of motorcycle accidents. You have people going to the hospital. We didn't have that. We had almost none of it. So a lot of things have happened. I think we have a chance to be stronger than before. I really do. I think the stimulus is very important, what we're doing. I think it's very, very important. Please, go ahead.
Mr. President, may I ask you about credit and debt as well?
Yeah.
Many American individuals, families have had to tap their credit cards during this period of time, and businesses have had to draw down their credit lines. Are you concerned, Mr. President, that may hobble the U.S. economy? All of that debt, number one. And number two, would you suggest to credit card companies to reduce their fees during this time?
Well, it's something that we've already suggested. We're talking to them. Business interruption insurance. I'd like to see these insurance companies. You know, you have people that have paid. When I was in private, I had business interruption. When my business was interrupted through a hurricane or whatever it may be, I'd have business where I had it. I didn't always have it. Sometimes I had it. Sometimes I have a lot of different companies. But if I had it, I'd expect to be paid. You have people, I speak mostly to the restaurateurs, where they have a restaurant. They've been paying for 25, 30, 35 years, business interruption. They've never needed it. All of a sudden, they need it. And I'm very good at reading language. I did very well in these subjects, okay? And I don't see the word pandemic mentioned. Now, in some cases, it is. It's an exclusion. But in a lot of cases, I don't see it. I don't see reference, and they don't want to pay up. I would like to see the insurance companies pay if they need to pay, if it's fair. And they know what's fair, and I know what's fair. I can tell you very quickly. But business interruption insurance, that's getting a lot of money to a lot of people. And they've been paying for years. You know, sometimes they just started paying. But you have people that have never asked for business interruption insurance, and they've been paying a lot of money for a lot of years for the privilege of having it. And then when they finally need it, the insurance company says, we're not going to give it. We can't let that happen.
That's US President Donald Trump giving his daily briefing to the assembled press there at the White House. Let's bring in Kimberley Halkett. Kimberley, should Americans decide should they stay healthy or go back to work? The president was asked. Both, he said, when the time is right, they will stay healthy and they will go back to work.
Yeah, a little bit of a contradiction there from the U.S. president, because on the one hand, he said that he would listen to public health officials. As we know, these national guidelines until April 30th in the United States, 98% of Americans affected by them for the most part. Staying home has had a devastating impact, obliterated the U.S. economy. And so the question becomes, you know, May 1st, the day after, what is your advice to Americans? And will you listen to public health officials if they say, look, you need to extend these guidelines? Now, the U.S. president for now saying, yes, that he would listen to those guidelines. But at the same time, we've had even him tweeting as early as this morning. We know that there have been plans in the works for the better part of a week from the administration officials behind the scenes working on a plan to reopen aspects of the U.S. economy, get Americans back to work sometime in the middle of May, perhaps even earlier. And you did hear one of the questions coming up in that briefing, one of those follow-up questions from one of the reporters saying, but how can this happen if there is no national testing plan in place? And there seemed to be a bit of a dodging of that question, only sort of an answer from the public health officials that that is part of the strategy, but that they are still building it. So as you can see, in terms of Americans going back to work and knowing whether or not they can do that and still remain healthy, the answer still remains very much in question. It doesn't appear that there is a definitive answer coming from those public health officials.
Right, and there was also this date of May the 1st mentioned in one of the questions, wasn't there, saying that if the doctors came back to the president and said, look, you can't reopen now, would he listen? And he said he would, but he also knows the other side of the argument, by which I presume he meant the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely what he means. And the other question that the president was asked about is this invisible enemy that he constantly talks about, that he's a wartime president. And he has tweeted very recently that it will be in retreat soon, that soon it will be gone. You know, the president doubled down on that. And it is certainly, again, one of his sort of over-optimistic projections, given the fact that he was standing in the same room as public health officials who say there is reason to be optimistic, but this is not the time to be getting overexcited about removing any of these restrictions, because we know that there are other areas where there are encouraging signs, but still things are very dire. We are talking about, you know, more than 10,000, tens of thousands of Americans who have died, and hundreds of thousands of Americans who have been infected. The United States has hardly turned the corner. That's the message from these public health officials, even as the U.S. president continues to project optimism. And he's defended this all the way along, saying that he has to be the country's cheerleader in dark times, dark economic times, in times of anxiety. That's what he's continuing to do, sending once again these contradictory mixed messages.
All right, Kimberley, appreciate that. That's Kimberley Halkett there at Washington, D.C.